Hello students and everybody watching. Here is my video on how to paint stencils using spray paint. I have never used spray paint to paint stencils before. I've used spray paint to repaint furniture. So I've learned a lot in this video and I hope you learn a lot too. This video goes along with the stencils lesson that I've taught in class. You'll notice I've placed my paper that I'm going to spray on top of some protective sheets. I use garbage bags and I made sure the garbage bags would stay on the ground. Additionally, I've taped my stencils onto the paper. If you're using a dual layer stencil, you need to make sure that you kind of outline the corners so that you can overlay. But here we will start with our single layer stencil. So one color will go on to the stencil. You want to be in a well-ventilated area, so outdoors preferably. It also suggests that you wear a mask and you have gloves on to protect your skin. You would be spraying about 6 inches away from your actual stencil and try to spray in the direction of the wind, not against the wind. So here I'm spraying the first stencil and you'll notice I'm going horizontally and I'm doing just a thin coat. And then I would let that dry for about a minute and go over it again. And here's the second stencil. We'll be using much bigger paper so you won't have overspray going outside of your stencil. So here's my second layer. You need to make sure that you keep shaking the bottle, and I think you need to shake it for a good 2 minutes before you actually start spraying anything. You need to wait until your stencil and your spray paint dries before you lift up, because it might bleed through the stencil and kind of go outside of the lines you've already created. You'll also notice that I have a lot of overspray because it was a really windy day. So in order to avoid this, it's great to put newspaper around your stencil area to make sure that you don't get overspray in areas you don't want. So here is the 2-layer stencil I've already shown you how to make in class. And here's my first layer. You can see some splotchy effects happening from the spray paint. That just means that the nozzle isn't cleaned properly. And here's my second layer, and I waited before I took off the stencil. On top of this, I will place the second layer, and that's what I'm going to make in black. And again, just even strokes horizontally or vertically, and then you can go over once it's dry. So in this one, I'm going to use 3 different colors. Layer 1 is going to be medium, layer 2 is going to be light, and layer 3 is going to be dark. I already showed you how to decide what layers go first in class. And you can tell how windy it was because the spray paint's not even going on the paper, it's kind of floating away. But there's layer 1, I did a couple layers, and here is my first layer of medium, my mid-tone. Then you need to really make sure that you line up your edges. So you can see the tape that I had already placed around my first stencil, and now I'm lining up my second stencil in the same way, and that just makes sure your stencil overlaps where you want it to go. Again, the paper is flying away. There's a lot of splotchy pieces. It was really cold. Hopefully we get to do this on a sunny day that doesn't have too much wind. And my third layer is going on here in black. Those are my darks. And again, I wait for it to dry. I didn't have the best colors to use, so I tried to pick colors that mimicked light, medium, and dark. So in this example, your layers don't actually overlap in color. The layers are separated in space. So here's my layer 1 that I showed you how to make in class. And then you line it up to make sure your first layer is covered, and then you would spray your second layer. And it really all depends. Your layering depends on the image that you want to create. And then the third layer will come, and that would be the stem. Always add value just in the way you spray. So you can see here I tried to put darks in the middle, my lights on the sides, and then I kept my stems about the same. I did state in class, I researched the effects of having fresh cut roses has on the environment, and we did find out that it is quite detrimental to the environment just because of how many chemicals they do put in, toxic chemicals they do put into the fertilizer and the growth of these flowers. So with that in mind, I had to decide on how I could, make a message using these stencils. What could I do to possibly get this message across? So my first idea maybe was putting in a cage, trying to communicate that, roses should not be left out of the cage and they should be held within a certain space. And my second example tried to show the addition of these toxic chemicals to the flower. So you can have a beautiful flower, but again, you're adding some poisonous materials to them, and people don't often know about that. So as you're making your final stencils, you want to kind of think about your message and what's important to you and what you want to communicate. Again, these are hand-drawn stencils, so I didn't actually print out a picture and then divide it. I drew a picture that I wanted to make, and then I divided my picture into islands and bridges, and then I cut out my islands, and I made sure before cutting out that my bridges would be thick enough. So the white areas, or the areas left blank that aren't black here, that part of the bird cage, would be considered my islands, and you can see my actual stencil in class.